Good evening, everyone. I call out a recess, Lee County Zoning Board of Appeals hearing on petition number 21P1563, BSW Devco LLC's latest petition for a special use permit to repower an existing WEX development in portions of East Grove and May Townships here in Lee County. In case you've lost, I know saying it, at least for people on Zoom, is silly, but in case you're listening on YouTube and have lost the information, the Zoom meeting ID is 915-3923-9154. The password is 209840. If you want to listen but not participate, watch and listen on YouTube, on your computer or cell phone using your browser, go to www.youtube.com. In the search bar, type Lee County IL, short for Illinois, Zoning Board of Appeals. No need to be concerned with upper or lower cases. That should bring you to a drop-down menu. Find the session date. If you want to be listening to us tonight, that would be the 11th of May. Click on that and voila, you should be seeing us. For any folks who want technical assistance, you may call 815-973-3449. That's Ms. Duffy's emergency technical assistance line. I note in attendance tonight from the Honorable Zoning Board of Appeals, its Chairman, Mr. Forster, its Vice Chairman, Mr. Burrow, then Mr. Bothy, Pratt, Hughes, and Meyer. Present representing the petitioner and with two of the petitioner's representatives is Mr. Dave Stryker. The ever-present zoning officer, Dee Duffy, is present, as is her expert assistant, Alice. Ms. Court Reporter Callie is with us. Of course, I'm here and representing the county through the state's attorney's office. We're honored to have Mr. Fox with us. That brings attendance in the hearing room to 14 because there are no interested parties present in the hearing room. There appears to be one person participating on Zoom in a teleconference manner. So that takes care of those housekeeping matters. Somebody remind me before we leave to talk about some future dates, but not right now. When we opened this hearing about a week ago, we didn't have time to do anything other than start the process. So, Mr. Stryker, the ball's in your court. Should you wish to give an opening statement?
I do, Judge. Thank you. Good evening to all of you. It's great to see everybody again. I want to extend our special thank you to all of you for hosting us this evening. It's nice to be back with a lot of sunlight coming through the window. And for those of you out there that either are participating virtually or are new, my name is David Stryker, and I'm the attorney for the applicant, in this case, BSW Devco LLC. Again, great to be with all of you. And, since we were together a couple of months ago, a couple of things have changed about the project. Primarily, the ownership has changed. And you're going to hear tonight from the person to my right, Mike Spearschneider, who's with Exis Management Partners. And Mike served in a similar position to what Jim Cutie did the last time. We will also have the owner, Vital, here hopefully next session to brief all of you on who they are, and most importantly, to reflect the commitment of the new owner to the repowering project and to Lee County in particular. So I think that'll be interesting for you all to hear that, and certainly definitely a presence we want to make is how committed we are still to this project, of course, and to Lee County in general. The events and primarily the ownership change has resulted in another key step, which is a refiling of the SUP application that's before you here tonight. And while we have filed a new application, I think what you'll find as we go through our presentation and the testimony, much of the material facts and conditions and equipment being reused, et cetera, about this project is going to remain the same. However, As I mentioned last time, one of the helpful things about coming back for a project again another time is that you learn a lot by going through zoning board of appeals hearings, as have we. And there's a couple of key improvements we think we're making to the plan that we're going to talk to you about this evening and throughout the rest of the hearing. At the end of the day, the process we've gone through, and I know it's been long and very involved, and you know, we're talking about a big project that affects a lot of people, so it naturally would be. But we think that we're going to present a very compelling proposal that's going to create jobs here regionally, increase local tax revenue, decrease the effect of the project on local residents, increase the amount of clean renewable energy being produced by the project. And this is all, again, while we're shrinking the overall footprint of the project. So in sum, we believe this is one of those rare projects that offers a lot of benefits locally, a lot of benefits regionally, and it does that across the board, really without creating any significant new impacts for Lee County residents or negative impacts. So hopefully, when we're done with our presentation, you have the same belief that we do, that this is really something that hopefully everybody can get behind and is going to be a great thing for Lee County. Again, and if you do share our opinion, we'd love to have your support for the SUP application. As I mentioned in November and December, and then through January and February when we were last together, we certainly recognize what an undertaking it is for a county to go through a special use permitting process with a wind farm. That is not lost on us. And even in a repowering context, we're again greatly appreciative of the time and effort that the Zoning Board of Appeals members spend with us, that you and your staff spend, the state's attorney's office and Judge Slavin and Callie. And, you know, recognizing what an incredible lift it is on your end, I'm sure you can imagine it's a really significant, expensive, time-consuming lift on our end as well. And I mentioned that, you know, not to, of course, engender any sympathy, but just to pass along to you that the fact that we're willing to go through all this for a third time, one, hopefully sets the table for how important the changes we're going to discuss are to us. But secondly, and most importantly, how committed we are to repowering the Big Sky project and making it a whole lot better than the 10-year-old project that's out there right now. And that's our overarching goal with this whole process. And we absolutely believe that at the end of the day, when this repowering is complete, it'll be worth all the effort that you all have put in to really, I think, do something great for Lee County. And, you know, as I mentioned before, we recognize that you're all, I think the judge mentioned it last Thursday, but it's not lost on us that you're all essentially volunteers that are out there to protect the best interests of Lee County residents. And we want to let you know that we're cognizant of that. And that's how we're viewing this project as well, is that what is the best thing going forward for the county and the project. And luckily, those two goals, I think, come together here. So with that being said, let me tell you what we're here to talk about tonight. And it's great to be in a position to be able to talk about that, not only with you all live, but also with the folks that are able to participate virtually, because of course, this whole process we're going through now does not work without the participation of residents. And it's great to be able to be here in Lee County where you guys really run these hearings well and folks can participate virtually as well. But first and foremost, with our specific plans, similar to what you heard last time, we plan to decommission each and every one of the existing 114 turbines out there right now, which have the Suzland S88 turbines installed on them. When I say decommission or remove, what we're going to be doing is removing the tops of the towers and the nacelles, the Suzland nacelles, along with the blades, and replacing those. Similar to what you heard last time, we not only intend to use the existing foundation, but also to use the existing towers that are there supporting the turbines. Similar to what you heard in the fall and this winter with regard to the potential to repower with GE's, the Vestas turbines that we're talking about tonight have a unique docking collar that you can put on the tower to allow the existing tower to accept the new nacelle, which is really a great advancement even since we were talking in 2019. Of the turbines that are going to be repowered, 58 of those may be located in Lee County, with the remainder of the turbines to be located in Bureau. Similarly to what we talked about last time, and you remember the term we used, the tier 1 turbine, that was with regard to the GE. Tonight, and for the rest of the hearing, we're going to be talking about a Vestas turbine model that is also a tier 1 turbine, and I think it's fair to say it's either among the best or the best commercially available turbine that's out there. So we're really excited to be able to bring this option here to Lee County. And we look forward to introducing the new turbines to you and describing the significant benefits that these Vestas models will provide over and above the existing S88 turbines. Notably for area residents, the benefits of the Vestas turbines versus the Suzland are the lower noise produced by the turbines at lower wind speed. The main difference between the GE turbines that we talked a lot and you heard a lot about last time and the Vestas models we're talking about tonight is that the Vestas model have a higher capacity factor than the GE turbines. And that means while the overall installed capacity of the project will remain at approximately 240 megawatts, with these new Vestas turbines that operate much more efficiently than either the existing Suzlands or the GEs that we previously talked about, more power will be produced by the project on a daily average basis than you have currently. And we're going to be doing that again with a significantly smaller footprint. And again, this increased capacity factor I just mentioned, that's one of the key improvements of the application, we think, compared with the last time. And in addition, we've continued our outreach to regional stakeholders regarding the footprint of the project. And as you may remember from both the 2019 and 2020 proposals, we had committed to permanently decommissioning turbines 84 and 86. And this was based on input and potential impacts, at least that was developed back in 2019, related to the Ryan wetland and the Sand Prairie Land and Water Reserve. You know, as part of the process we went through last time, we learned more about what was going on out there. And in follow-up, we've spoken to representatives from the reserve. And we're pleased to share that through partnering both with the reserve and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources, we believe we can repower those turbines and still provide significant benefits to the natural areas around the reserve. So that's one of the things that we're talking about tonight, and part of the process that we've gone through between February and May 11th as we stand here today. Being able to responsibly repower those turbines, again, offers the ability to move to other locations, possibly higher priority locations to target for a permanent decommissioning. So that's one of the topics we're going to get into as the testimony develops. So there'll be several witnesses that you'll hear from in this process. The first one of which is to my right, Mike Spearschneider. And we'll introduce Mike in a second, but as I mentioned, we'll also have a representative from the project owner, Vital, here to talk to you. And that's, again, really just to tell you about who they are, why they're here, and how committed they are to the repowering. In addition to Mike, you'll also hear again from shadow flicker modeling experts, our sound modeling experts, signal interference experts, and also Terry Vanderwall, who you remember from Stantec, who is very familiar with the ecology and the environment in the area. And you know, he was the one that helped the project come up with the specific plans to protect endangered species, such as the ornate box turtle and the Blandings turtle. And it was interesting. The Chicago Tribune ran a big article about how important those turtles are to the region, which of course caught my attention. I think it ran in the Sunday paper. So certainly, hopefully you got the feeling last time how important that was to us to protect those assets here. And it was doubly reinforced to me when I saw that article this weekend. So with regard to sound and shadow, you'll again hear from the Burns and Max folks, Burns and Mac or Burns and McDonald folks that I think you hopefully have a good impression from last time. And they're really here to update you on the minimal differences between the GE and the you heard about last time in the Vestas, but hopefully some more considerable differences between the Vestas and the existing Suzland S88 turbines. So in summary, we're again excited to be here with you and present this project, and we're very appreciative of all of your time and efforts to get us to this point. I I think you'll note we've prepared a very detailed application, including attached expert reports. I've also passed out to all of you a Redwell folder with tabs in it. Those will be the exhibits that we enter or plan to enter this evening, just so everybody has us there. Really understanding that you all have been through a lot of this before. We're really trying to streamline everything, rely as much as we can on written materials, and put everything into the record to be as efficient as possible with your time, and make sure we have everything covered. So again, we want to make everything as short and succinct as possible, while making sure that we provide a full briefing about the project and are able to answer all your questions and those from the audience members. So again, thank you for hosting us, and Judge, we're ready to present our first witness.
And please do.
All right. With that, I would like to present Michael Spearschneider.
Okay, Mr. Spearschneider, if you'll stand up, I don't care where particularly. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Right next to me, sort of next to me.
Oh, we're doing okay.
Yeah, we're a little looser now. Yeah, in the
Direction's
box.
the camera coming from? Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
That's all right. She's not video conferencing anyway, she can hear, so. Oh, I thought since she didn't show up. Okay, regardless.
Mike, if you could state your name and spell it for the record, please.
Yeah, hi, Mike Spearschneider. I'm sorry, does this need to be on?
It's on, it just needs to be close.
Okay.
Sometimes you almost got to swallow it.
Yeah,
Got it.
that's our favorite phrase. You got to swallow it. Would you spell your last name for?
Sure. SPEERSCHNEIDER.
All right.
Thank you.
And what's your current business address?
Yeah, I'm employed by the Axis Management Partners. We are at 1435 Bedford Avenue in Pittsburgh, PA, 15219.
Okay.
And would you, again, for our court reporters, spell Exus?
Axis is EXUS.
Mike, I know you brought a CV with you here tonight, but if you could just take the board members briefly through your relevant academic background and history.
Yeah, real briefly, I'm an undergrad. I had a Bachelor of Science in Physics and a Bachelor of Arts in Environmental Studies, and that was from the University of Pittsburgh. And then worked for a couple of years and went back to graduate school and got a Master's in Science in Material Science and Engineering, and also a Master in Science in Technology and Policy, and that was from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
Great. And how are you currently employed?
As I said, employed by Axis Management Partners, and I am a partner there leading the development efforts.
Great. And what are your duties in that position?
Basically, as leading developer efforts, I quarterback all the project development that we undertake. That's involved with acquisitions, transactions, and entails coordinating with a team of subject matter experts like the consultants that are presented for this project, and ensure that each portion of a project is progressing as needed to meet the overall investment objectives, and focusing on local, state, and federal permits, and also stakeholder coordination, and just overall ensuring that the projects have the necessary support and operate in an effective manner for our investors.
Great. And how long have you been in that position?
I've been at Axis for just 3 months now, but had previously worked with some of the other principals and other partners at Axis for particularly for 12 years for a company that was one you may be familiar with, which is Everpower Wind Holdings. They were a former owner of this project, and I would work there again for 12 years and help build that company from about 4 employees up to a company that was that had developed and built over a gigawatt of installed capacity. And so, short time at Axis, but a long time with the team that we have at Axis.
Yeah, it sounds like you have significant experience in the renewable industry. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Aside from that 12 years, like I said, at Everpower, I had worked for a solar developer, owner, operator, And then most recently, immediately before joining Exis, I was with the National Trade Organization, the American Wind Energy Association. And in that capacity, I was leading up their permitting and environmental policy efforts on a federal level.
And approximately, if you can say, how many megawatts of renewable projects have you overseen during the development process?
I've lost count because, of course, not all development projects get actually constructed and built, and some of them not constructed by the company that I work for. But if I had to guess, it'd probably be 5 gigawatts or more that I've been involved with on one form or another.
Okay. And have you ever managed any projects of similar size and scope to the Big Sky repowering that we're here talking about tonight?
Yeah. Obviously, from the standpoint of once owning the project or being a group that owned the project, but in terms of developing a project of that scope, we've done a number of projects like that in my career, many in the Midwest and the Northeast, including in Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York, and then throughout the Midwest and out to California. So a lot of experience in this kind of project.
All right, great. And Mike, as you know, we're here today to talk about the special use permitting application filed by BSW Devco here in Lee County for a special use permit to repower the existing Big Sky project. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And before you, you have what I've previously marked as Petitioners Exhibit number 1. Are you familiar with that document?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And is that the special use permit application filed on April 2nd in this matter?
Yes, it is.
And can you describe briefly for the board members what your involvement was in the preparation of that application?
Right, in my capacity. So this one, as David had mentioned in his opening, involves a number of reports from consultants, experts in various fields. So I worked and managed those consultants as they went through and completed that work, and essentially oversaw the compiling of this application and all of its components.
Is it fair to say you were in the overall lead or the supervisor of the preparation of the application?
Yes, that's right.
And for the
Mr. Stricker, just a housekeeping matter before it gets away from me. In the exhibit packet you gave me, tab number 1 contains a face sheet called petition for special use permit, but it doesn't have the special use permit. I don't care about that. All I want to do is make a record that there is a petition on file and it's of record. But if any board member wants to see the petition, if you'd provide it to him, that'd be great.
Yep. And Judge, I was about to make the same comment that in the exhibit packets that I packed out, that exhibit number 1 is the only place where I put a placeholder because I believe we submitted a number of copies of the application that were
I agree.
distributed to board members. So Mike, before we get into the meat of the application, your testimony, is there anything in the application, the April 2nd application, that needs to be updated at this time?
Not at this time. Our experts, as they come through, they may have some updates on specific portions of the application, particularly, for instance, the shadow flicker or the sound, and they will address that. But for purposes of this application, consider this a complete document.
And if I could, Mike, could I ask you to briefly describe the purpose of your testimony here today?
Yeah, sure. I think we'll be running through all components of the project, providing the general description and rationale for the project, discussing some of the entities that were part of the development, construction, and operation of the project. We'll describe some of the other agreements that we have entered into in support of this project in the general project permitting process. We'll discuss some of the studies and the agency consultations that we've had for the project to date. And then we'll also be describing how the project has compiled all the applicable, complied with all of the applicable Lee County ordinance standards and requirements. And then, just generally a description of the repowering process. Yep.
Mike, are you familiar with this document?
I am.
Describe to the board members what it is, please.
Yeah, it's just my CV describing some of the experience that I've just talked about in my career.
Okay, and I take it that was prepared by you directly?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
And is it accurate and up to date?
It is, yes.
Okay. Mike, have you prepared a presentation to give this evening?
I have.
Okay. At this point, I'm I'm going to present you what I'm going to mark as Petitioners Exhibit 3. I can get a full and complete copy of your presentation.
It looks like it is, yes.
All right, and was that presentation prepared directly by you?
It was, yes.
All right, thanks. And let me turn it over to you to take the board members through the presentation.
Okay, great, thanks. I think it's projecting up there. We just thought it would be a good way to give you a quick overview and walk through some of the key components of the project to get you a good view. And of course, I'm happy to answer any questions as we go.
No, we don't do that.
Oh, we don't do that, sorry. So the first one here, just give a general project summary. Some of this we've touched on, but it's probably worth repeating. I will take this opportunity to echo what David had said, where we really do appreciate the board's time for this, and we know, and again, my experience with developing projects, I know this is no small task, and doing it essentially 3 times in a couple of years is a lot, and I appreciate it. I really do. So just to kind of, where we are on this, obviously the project or a project received the special use permit back in April of 2019 for repowering. And then another application was brought to the board in 2020. And right at the end of that process is when the new owner, Vital, came in. And after looking at various factors, it was found that there was enhanced value for the project in these new turbines, and that's essentially what drove this decision to have to go back. So some of the key concepts for this application, as David mentioned, we will be repowering 109 of the current 114 turbine locations in Lee and Bureau County. 58 of those, so all of the Lee County turbines would be repowered under this plan. And then we would be permanently decommissioning 5 turbines. And those would be all in Bureau County. And so that's the plan at this point. We would be using a combination of Vestas V120s and V110s, mostly V120s. So the V120s it's kind of indicated by the numbers there. 120 is meters, indicates the rotor diameter. And the 110 is slightly smaller. And we will be using those in a few spots because of some of the impacts, whether it's setbacks or sound or shadow, where it's appropriate to use the smaller turbine there. But as I said, I think it'll be like 5 turbines out of the 109. So relatively small number, mostly a V120 project. And then as Dave mentioned, we'll be using all the same foundations and towers. So we won't be doing any moving of turbines or erecting new ones in any locations. And to support all this, we'll be updating some of the studies, the shadow flicker, communications, environmental, wildlife, and then of course the engineering and construction related studies and permits that go along with that. It was important to note, I mean, as part of, again, the respect of this process and what you've all been through, we've gone through we've gone through efforts to make it as similar and in form and format as possible. So these studies are using the same team of experts. And so the Burns and McDonnell, Stantec, ComSearch, they will all be familiar to you. The form of the reports, even though their updates will be familiar to you. That's the goal anyway. So hopefully that would make it as easy as possible. So that's kind of the general overview of the project. We want to talk a little bit on, I guess, the next slide here on BSW DevCo. There can be some confusion on this at times, but essentially there's 2 companies, BSW DevCo LLC and the Big Sky Wind LLC, and they're both 100% owned at this point by Vital, or Vital Wind 1 LLC. And Vital Wind 1 LLC is a wholly owned subsidy of Vital. And these are all fairly typical, even there's a lot of LLCs and a lot of different things. These are very typical financial vehicles for this kind of project. And that's why it's set up in that way. There was at one point, this was sort of prior to Vital's involvement, the BSW DevCo was formed to support some of the repower efforts. And there are plans, or it's intended that after the repower, we'll be able to merge or consolidate those, so there won't be the sort of two LLCs floating around. Perhaps importantly, the operation of the project. So right now, it's operated by a company called RWE Energy Services. They're going to continue to operate the existing project now for the next few weeks anyway, at which point the Vestas O&M team will take over the operation of the turbines. And that they'll do that even though the Suzland are still up. They'll take that over. And the little distinction there is that Vestas will operate the turbines themselves. So they will make sure that the turbines are operating effectively, efficiently, and properly. Exis will be the ones who will be operating the rest of everything else. So they call it the BOP, or the balance of plant. So that's the connection systems, that's the transmission systems, that's the access roads, that's the laydown yards, the operations buildings. All of that stuff is Exis operating that part of it. And we've essentially taken over that role now. Still working. There's a transition period with the existing operators. But going forward, once the project is fully repowered, it'll be Vestas operating the turbines, and Exis operating the rest of it, and then operating as the owner's rep with Vestas. So even though Vestas is operating the turbines, they belong to Vital, and Exis will be the one that will sort of be the liaison between the owner and the operator. To go to the next page here, a little bit about Vital, and as we said, there'll be a Vital representative here at the next hearing, and he'll be able to go through this in a bit more detail. But Vital is a global independent energy trader. They are investment grade. They have strong financial credentials in terms of liquidity, and they operate across the world in 40 plus offices across the globe. And they have a long track record of investing in projects, assets, and infrastructure. So they're a trading company, and they're also invested in physical assets, like wind projects and solar projects. And they're really kind of getting into the North American market right now. And they've made a lot of progress in a very short time. They're now at 700 megawatts of solar and other renewable assets, with another few hundred in the pipeline. One of the good things, I think, for the county and for this process with Vital is that they are able to finance the project within their own company. So a lot of developers may need to get partners with others that could provide debt or tax equity. Tax equity is important because of the federal tax incentives, and you need to have a sort of a tax bill to be able to fully take advantage of those assets. So a lot of developers and operators need to partner with someone who has that kind of a tax bill or tax appetite. Vital does not need that. They can do that on their own. So they're able to move quickly because of that. We don't have to work. Now they may get some financing from other entities, but they don't need to, and that allows them to continue to move forward with this project. And then just by the nature of their business, understanding the markets, and they're primarily a trader of energy. So the key part of a project like this, of selling power to the grid, they understand very deeply, and so they know what they're doing when it comes to that part of it. So again, the Vital rep will have more to say about that at the next session. So next, we wanted to just kind of give you a brief description of Exis, of us, and Exis Partners, we're an independent investment and asset management firm focused on renewable energy. So that's kind of all we do is renewable energy. And we've worked with a variety of investors, supporting opportunities and helping those investors look at technical, commercial, and operational aspects of these assets, and help them make sure that those assets are doing what they need to do to provide the proper value for the investors. We are, as I said, the partners at Exis are former executives at EverPower, and have a lot of experience in doing this kind of work. So, and I can say we're very excited to be back here and involved in this project. It's a great project and a great area. And as I said, as we go forward, Exis will be involved on sort of a day-to-day basis, operating the project and managing the asset. So, all right, so that's a lot that I went through. So I tried to kind of distill this down into one sheet, and that's the next one we have right here. So what does this all mean at the end of the day? Simplify this. There's the project entity, the sort of financial vehicle that owns the project. That's BSW DevCo. That's the petitioner. That's who will be on the permit. The owner of the project through those vehicles is Vital. Vital is, you can think of as the owner. Exis is essentially the manager of the project. We're the project manager. And then the project operator is Vestas, and really Exis will be overseeing all of the operations. And maybe most importantly is if you have a question or something needs to be dealt with, who do you call? You can all call Exis. That would be us. So that's either myself, my number's on there. I guess I'll put that up there and just hand that out to anybody, I guess. And then Eric Lampert, who is actually our on-site project manager. So he'll be here. He's on the ground here every day. So those are that's kind of the connection to the project. So the next slide here is just you probably can't see it very well, but it's just to give you a sense. This is really just a sense of the site layout. You can see that yellow dotted line in the middle is the county border line. Everything north of that is Lee County, of course, and everything south is Bureau. The red dots are where the current project, the turbines that are slated for decommissioning sit. You'll note that there's only 4 of those right now, and I said that we would be decommissioning 5. So there is one that we haven't quite decided exactly which one would come down, and that's to be determined. And I should note that that could be in Lee County. That is still a possibility. But all the other ones, the blue dots, are ones that are existing right now and that will be repowered. Worth taking a quick second here to go through the benefits. David did a good job of going through some of these. We talked about the reduced number of turbines, which I guess for some people is a benefit, but for others they'd maybe like to keep them. But there will be fewer of them, 5 fewer of them. No changes. I think this is important. No changes to the transmission lines, the substations, the collection system, O&M buildings. None of that will be changing. That's all the same. So it makes for the process to be a lot lower impact all around. So that's an important part. Property taxes will be important. Obviously, are an important part of this kind of a project. And there's nothing dramatically changing about how the property taxes are calculated, but what does happen is that the new project will sort of reset the depreciation schedule. So if you're aware of that, when this existing project was first built, the property taxes were based on the capital value of that project, and that depreciates over time. So the resulting tax payments depreciate over time. This will reset and get a bit of a boost on the property taxes to the taxing authorities, and so that'll be, I think, a good thing for the community. Of course, landowner payments will continue. That's an important part of this too. People who host the projects and are otherwise involved in the project do get revenue payments from us, from the company, and those, there's a significant portion of that we believe can be spent locally on goods and services. So that's a great benefit for the area. During construction, we will have about 150 jobs that will be, if not local, certainly as regional as possible. We are working with a number of entities in the community to provide benefits directly, whether it's the Village of Ohio, whether it's some of the charitable organizations like United Way and the Chamber of Commerce's, and so we're proud to be a part of the community in that way. And then another thing that David mentioned, which is the increased capacity factor of the project. So more megawatt hours coming out of this project, significantly more megawatt hours coming out of this project, which means less, more emissions-free energy that is going to be available to the grid. And for environmental reasons, that's a very important component. So I think just ending up here, just kind of give a sense of the project schedule. This is obviously kind of what's going to actually happen on the ground. So we're going through the hearings right now, obviously, and then we also have to go through a similar process in Bureau County, which will happen a little bit later, not too much later, but a little bit of a lag. But by all this to come together, so that mid-July, we are planning on starting the mobilization process. So mobilization would be essentially the contractor getting on site, setting up their laydown area, their mobile offices, getting equipment on site, just kind of getting ready to start the work. The work would start then in August, mid to late August, and the first bit of work will be called the civil work. So all those access roads going to the turbines would have to be widened. So to get the construction vehicles down, there'll have to be crane pads put next to each tower. So the big crane will come in and have a solid place to sit. And then improvements to the local roads, and we're working with the road commissioners at both the township and the county level on that. So there'll be some improvements, intersection improvements and those kind of things needed to make sure that the equipment can get in. And all that will be in preparation for the arrival of the equipment, the new blades, the new nacelles. Those are scheduled to arrive on site in the late October to early November timeframe. And then as soon as they're on site, and there'll be a schedule of them coming on for a few weeks. But as soon as they're on site, the contractors will be ready to start taking off the old Suzland turbines and putting up the new ones. And they'll sort of work through that process, likely starting up here in Lee County, and then going down south through the project and ending up in the southern part of the project down in Bureau County. And all of that should be done. So again, starting that decommissioning and repowering in October, November timeframe. We'd hope to be done in the April 2022 timeframe. Depending on weather and other factors, could extend it a bit, but certainly by in the first half of the year, by June or so, we'll be done, and restoration will be underway or done, and the project will be fully operational. So that's the quick overview.
All right. Thanks, Mike. Let me ask you a few follow-up questions, then I have a couple more areas I want to get into. But am I correct that we're applying to repower all 58 turbines in Lee County, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And I think you said that there could be potentially one decommissioning in Lee County, which would leave 57 in that case?
That's correct.
And compared to the proposal that was most recently made, I think that's when we were going to permanently decommission 84 and 86. So our proposal right now is at least one more turbine in Lee County over and above the prior proposal.
I don't know. I don't
Well,
remember
as
the
in,
prior.
before there's 58 turbines now. Before we had BSW had agreed to permanently decommission 84 and 86.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah.
So that would
that's
have
how I
brought us down
understand
to
it.
56.
Yeah, right. So that's and you covered that in the opening where 84 and 86 were slated, I understand, for decommissioning. And like you said, we work with the Rhine wetland and believe we can responsibly repower those turbines and provide a net benefit to those resources.
And one thing I wanted to highlight for the board members is, as you know, in Illinois, property tax formula assesses a turbine on a per megawatt basis.
Right.
Therefore, with the increased repowerings in Lee County, that would mean more tax revenue for Lee County just based on the additional installed megawatts, correct?
I guess if there's more repowering all 58, then yes, there'd be more tax revenue than the previous proposal in Lee County.
Let me ask you this, Mike, and I'm on page 4 of the notes we prepared, but we have a project here that's relatively new. It's only 10 years old. Tell the board members why are you looking at repowering this project? What are some of the, you've mentioned some of the factors that have come in, such as increased capacity factor, et cetera, but are there other external factors that are important for repowering?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the main driver is that extra power that comes out of the new technology, but there's a continuing environment at the federal level for incentives. So there are certain tax incentives that have been in place since, I believe, 1995, and they have continued to be extended. And perhaps at the time that this project was built, the horizon for that incentive was maybe thought to be fairly short, but it's for a number of different reasons has continued to be extended, and we're still in an environment where there's some fairly significant incentives around those federal tax codes, and so those are still there. Those extensions were passed by Congress here just recently, so that's kind of kept open a window to do this kind of work in the way that we are proposing. Yeah, and so I think that's one of the big components. So that again, along with which I think is even more important, is the extension or the improvements in the technology that allow more energy to come out of these projects.
Okay, so this is really a great time to be doing this project.
Yes.
Then if I could ask you, Mike, what are the factors that you and Patal took into account or will take into account when you decide which turbines are going to be permanently decommissioned?
Yeah, and again, since there's 5, which is considerably less than what was previously proposed for decommissioning, the factors tend to kind of work themselves out. But we've looked at a number of different things. We look at the setback requirements, both here and in Bureau County. We look at trying to minimize, and maybe this is the most important thing, is trying to minimize the impacts to the community, to neighbors. And we've gotten some feedback from individual landowners on that, both us directly, but through the record of this project as it goes through the process. We've also talked with the Village of Ohio. We've talked to the Rhine wetland, as we've talked about, and we have that in there as in the application as a factor that was considered, and it was in this case was considered and again allowed us to reach the decision to repower the project, or repower those rather than decommission them. So we look at all of these things, and not necessarily to say, well, this is the ones that should go in, but also to say, well, these are the ones that could stay or should stay, and have gone through that. And so, yeah, there's a number of things we look at, I would say big component of that is the setbacks and the impacts to neighbors, but also some of the other impacts as well.
And I've heard the term turbine wake effects used before. Is
Yeah.
that something that you considered?
To an extent, I mean, that is some that is a factor that we look at. So wake factor, I guess, to explain is as wind goes through a wind turbine, and it turns the blades. What comes out is a airflow that is disturbed, and that's less energetic. So if you have turbines that are directly behind that turbine, that's going to receive less energetic air or wind, and produce less power. So we do try to look at that and say, we want to make sure, and since these turbines going in will have a bigger blade diameters, rotor diameters, we'll look at that a little bit closer, and the effects would be a little bit different than the current turbines, which have the shorter turbine blades.
Mike, I'm going to present you what I'm going to mark as Exhibit 1. You have that?
Yep.
And are you familiar with Exhibit 4?
Yes.
Describe to the board members what it is.
It's just an email correspondence between myself and Deborah Carey, who is the representative with the Rhine wetland and Sand Prairie Reserve. And this resulted from a conversation that I started with Deborah, and again on turbine 84 and 86, the ones that are close to the reserve. We talked it through and talked about the different factors and the things that we are doing as a project to address particularly the turtles, but other environmental issues as well. And we also asked Deborah to speak with Dee, Ms. Duffy about that, to make sure that again, being conscious of the fact that we were talking about taking these out in previous iterations of this project, just wanted to share with everybody the conversation that we had. So this is an email that Deb shared with me that she initially sent to Ms. Duffy about our conversations and the fact that the Rhine wetland is okay with the repowering of those 2 turbines.
And, I know you weren't a participant in the last hearing, but I think I had mentioned there are some questions that arose as to how if the wetland and Sand Prairie Reserve had grown over the past 10 years. And
Right.
that was something that at least I didn't have a great answer to. And if I'm correct, that's sort of what spurred you to go on and have these conversations, correct?
Yeah, I guess, we heard that, wasn't sure. And, me coming in and I think you saw from my CV, I've done a lot of work on environmental issues with wind power. So I just figured we'd give her a call, give the reserve a call and say, and talk it through and see what the issues were. And I guess confirm that there wasn't a direct encroachment in the reserve, and that the things that we had in place to address any potential impacts were adequate. And that's with conversations with Ms. Carey, that's what we got to, was that there was no direct encroachment onto the reserve lands, and the steps that we were taking to mitigate any potential impacts to turtles or other wildlife resources in an area were adequate, and they were happy to partner with us moving forward on other projects.
Great. Turning to a slightly different topic, I know you mentioned Vital, and we'll hear from a representative of Vital, but that they had the financial strength to finance this repowering on balance sheet, correct?
Yes.
And that's certainly, as you mentioned, a really significant advantage that the current owner holds, because certainly not all, perhaps most developers aren't able to do that, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And am I also correct that this project does not currently have a classic or traditional power purchase agreement where we produce power and perhaps sell it directly to a large area manufacturer or through a virtual PPA to another entity?
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, at this point, there's no power purchase agreement in place for the project. We would sell it what's called merchant, which is you're selling it to the grid. And this project is connected to, it's called the PJM, Regional Transmission Organization. So it's selling power. It's one of the most liquid. It probably is the most liquid energy market in the world. It's connected here all the way to Philadelphia and Washington and the sort of load centers on the East Coast. So there's a great opportunities there to sell the power on a day-by-day basis. That's merchant.
And a lot of developers come in permit projects, but the ultimate fate of that project is dependent upon securing a PPA, and that's not the case here, correct?
No, and it's not to say that we won't enter into one of those kind of contracts down the road, but it's not something that, at least for Vital, that they need to have in place to finance the project.
To finance the repowering.
Yes, right.
Obviously, one of the things that we've highlighted is the extent and the efforts we've made to engage with local residents in the community. If you could just tell the board members about what type of efforts that Vital and Exis have undertaken in that area.
Right. And so I kind of alluded to a couple of them, but to kind of go through it. So we've of course been in touch with some of the participating landowners, and that's an ongoing thing. So, Vital's final purchase of the project was only a few weeks ago, but we've been making efforts to inform the landowners of that change of ownership. And then we will be, prior to the construction, hosting. We typically do a big dinner, get everybody in a big room and host a dinner, and then give them updates about the project. Given the pandemic and those dynamics, it might not be as easy to do that, but we will somehow, walk the landowners through the process, kind of like I'm doing here, of what to expect, when to expect it, and who to contact, maybe most importantly. On that front, it is the few landowners that I've talked to directly so far were excited by the contractor that we're lined up to use on this project, and it's the same one that did the original project. So there's actually some familiar faces there still. So that's I think is seen as a good thing. We've also, of course, the landowners, we've also talked to, I've mentioned the Village of Ohio down in Bureau County. They are involved because some of the turbines are kind of within a parameter of the village. And so it's important for us to have, to keep them informed and have good relationships with them. So we've spoken with them. We've also had our operations team. I think I mentioned that even though there's a change of who owns the operation team, a lot of the operators that are there now will remain, and we consider them as a key part of the interaction with the community and landowners, because they're on site, they're there every day, and people will just walk into the operations building, and if they have a question, they're happy to take those questions and do what they can to address any concerns or answer any questions. And then, I think as a show of what Vital is committed to, we've been in contact with, I think I mentioned it, the United Way in both Bureau and Lee County, the Princeton Chamber, and the Dixon Chamber of Commerce, and we'll be hosting and providing donations to those entities for certain activities throughout the summer. I think those things are very important. I think those things will continue. In every wind project like this, the interaction and the relationship with the community is really important. And we certainly believe that to be the case here. I mean, we're going to be here for a while, so it's important to be a good citizen, and we'll continue to make those efforts.
And then transitioning from the community to our participating landowners, you describe for the board what type of agreements the project has in place with the participating landowners?
Yeah, so of course, maybe the first thing you think of are the landowners who have turbines on their land. They have lease agreements, and those, of course, were executed back when the project was first built, so those are still there and intact. There are transmission easements, so there's the big transmission line that goes from here all the way down to the project, and all the landowners that have that transmission on their property are under agreements. We also do have the call them waivers, so whether it's in Lee County or Bureau County, to ensure compliance with the ordinances. If there are exceedances of setbacks or sound level thresholds, we have entered into agreement with certain landowners to get secure waivers for that, to essentially for them to say it's okay if the sound or the setback exceeds the threshold by a little bit. And I don't know if it goes to your question. I mean, those are some of the landowners. We also have other agreements we've mentioned with other entities like the IDNR. We'll have a ITA, incidental take authority authorization, from the IDNR. We've applied for that. That permit is pending, and it's because the turtle, particularly around the wetland, there's two turtles there: the ornate box turtle and the Blandings turtle. They are state listed species, and so we have a conservation plan that indicates what will happen. There's exclusion fencing during construction so that there's no turtles that sort of wander into the construction zone. And a host of other things that we'll be doing under that conservation plan to ensure that any impacts are avoided, if not avoided, certainly minimized. And so, that's those kind of agreements with them. And then also, and I think it's one of the applications with the Department of Ag as well. So there's a number of agreements outside of this permit that are we enter into to make the project happen.
All right, and then flipping ahead, you had mentioned in your comments that the project is going to generate significant economic activity locally. Is that correct?
Yes.
And describe what type of economic activity typically goes along with construction projects. I know folks are buying gas and spending nights at hotels, but you mentioned, I think, that 150 jobs are expected to be created. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. So that that's local electricians and different called trade jobs that'll be needed, and we'll bring those in, like I said, as regional as we can, and we work with some of the local labor entities to ensure that we're doing that in a way that helps the local community as much as possible. But yeah, like you said, I mean, it's a lot of that. The local businesses, the gas, the hotels, the restaurants should all see some increased usage, at least through the summer and or through the winter and into next spring.
Okay. And I know you've mentioned a lot of agreements, and you've also had a lot of outreach to the Village of Ohio. Is that correct?
Yes.
Does the project have any type of agreement or understanding in place with Ohio?
Yeah. At this point, we've agreed to pay them a community benefits called a partnership there. So that with $50,000, we would be providing to them to support various community benefit projects and work with them on what would be the best use of that money.
Okay. And I know you spent a lot of time with the Ryan Wetland and Sand Prairie Reserve as well. Do we have any agreements or understandings in place with them?
Yeah. So as part of, and this is actually part of the conservation plan with the IDNR, there's a commitment to provide $10,000 to the Ryan Wetland for them to continue their conservation efforts at the property. So again, happy and excited about that opportunity as well.
Okay, and I know you mentioned the agricultural impact agreement, and I think you also mentioned that we're in ongoing negotiations with regard to road use agreements with Lee County. Is that correct?
That is right. Yep.
And also 2 townships in Lee County?
Yep, 2 townships in Lee County. So, yeah.
And when is that process expected to wrap up, if you know?
I believe actually there was a transportation committee meeting on Monday, and I haven't received an update yet from David Anderson or Cheryl. And but that, we've essentially looked at the road use agreement, and actually previous ownership had negotiated a lot of that already. And we took that, and again, in the spirit of just making things as smooth and as efficient as possible, updated a few things in terms of timing and those things in that, and worked with Dave and Cheryl, and the TAL executed the document, at least for Lee County, in advance of the transportation committee meeting, and with the hopes that it would go to the board for final approval to be signed this month. So that's hopefully something that we can wrap up here very quickly.
And with regard to decommissioning the existing Suzland turbines, is there an understanding on how that's going to proceed?
Yes, so I think the conversation was around, whether the crane would come and pull everything down and put it on the ground, or they would do what they call a tilt fell, where they just kind of knock it down. So right now, the plan is that all 5 of the turbines would be lifted down onto the ground. And once it's on the ground, it gets kind of chopped up there into manageable pieces, and then shipped off to either recycling or disposal. And so that's the general plan. And then of course taking all of the associated parts of the project down to, I believe, 4 or 5 feet underground, regrade, and make the land essentially like it was prior to the project being built, as close as possible.
So let me to summarize, the 5 turbines that will be permanently decommissioned either in Lee or Bureau as part of this process will be taken down either with the crane method or the tilt method, as you mentioned. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the remaining 109 turbines will be repowered. Am I correct that a crane will go up and take the nacelle off?
Yeah. But yeah. So right. It's all with the big crane. Take the nacelle down and the old blades down. Again, take those down and take those away, and then put up the new ones.
Okay.
With the same crane.
So
it'd be the same crane.
It'd be essentially that simple.
Yes.
Okay, great. And
all that simple, but yes, it is.
right, yeah. And then finally, like all wind projects, this one will have a final decommissioning agreement in place with the county. Is that correct? As in,
yes.
Once the repowered project is decommissioned.
Yes, that's right.
And if you could describe that agreement briefly.
Yeah, so that agreement will just outline what has to happen at the time of decommissioning. What qualifies for end of life, and then the time frames for the project to have before it has to be decommissioned, which I believe is a year, and then what is to be done for decommissioning. So primarily that's getting rid of everything down to that 5 feet, and regrading the land. There could be some things that remain, and that's really up to the landowner. So, for example, those access roads, some people who are farming those lands like that because it gives them access into the field. So, those things could stay. And but if landowner wants them to be decompacted and returned, then the decommissioning plan would call for that as well.
And if I'm correct, the decommissioning plan is Exhibit K to
Yes.
Exhibit 1,
Yeah.
the SUP application.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, there's probably an important part too I neglected to mention on that decommissioning plan is that the company will put in place a letter of credit that would ensure that the decommissioning happens at the end of the project life, regardless of what happens to the project company. So that's so that the county and the townships are ensured that those turbines will come down.
Okay, good. And we'll touch upon that a little bit more when we get to the AMA. So, Judge, I'm about to transition to another topic. I don't know if anybody would like to take a break now or we can keep going.
Tell me how much longer, just guessing, how much longer
For the full testimony?
for your next topic?
Oh, I'm ready to transition right now to the next topic.
No, how long would you take doing it?
How long is the next?
I could break it up into any chunk that I
All
think
right, he's
people
hitting, maybe it's time. So that's great. We'll take 10 minutes. We'll see everybody at quarter after.
record, and you may continue, Mr. Stryker.
Sure. Mike, I know you said that you were the one that had supervised and was ultimately in charge of preparing the SUP application for this matter, correct?
That's correct, yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the key inputs that you and the consultants used in preparing the application was the Lee County ordinances that are germane to wind development. Is that correct?
Yes, of course, yep.
All right. Then, as you know, there's a number of findings that the county board and the Board of Appeals members are tasked, or areas that they're tasked with looking at. And one of those areas is with regard to public health, safety, and general welfare. So my question to you, and I'm wondering if you can answer, is can you speak to the project's impact generally on health and safety and the public welfare, and whether or not the planned repowering will promote health, safety, and the general welfare of the public?
Yeah, so, obviously, since this is a repowering project, Lee County has already, in the past, determined that the project was in the public interest and would not negatively affect public health, safety, and general welfare. So, there's that. But aside from that, I do believe that the repowering will even further mitigate negative concerns. The turbines are quieter at lower wind speeds. So that is a benefit, maybe slightly higher at the top speed, but the projects don't always operate at the top speeds. The project is, of course, committed to following all applicable laws and regulations to ensure that the project is operated in a safe manner. And then, because the project does generate about 40% more clean energy than the current project, that could displace dirtier forms of electricity and help improve air quality and promote the health and general welfare of residents of the county and of Illinois in general. And then finally, the project is going to generate the tax income, tax revenues to landowners and local community, and it's just influx of capital generally promotes health and safety and the general welfare of the community, and supporting programs that I had talked about before. So, overall, we do believe it protects and promotes the health and safety and general welfare.
And I would assume it's also fair to say that with reduction of 5 turbines between the planned 109 that are going to be repowered and the 114 that are there now, that'll reduce the effects of the turbines, correct?
Yes, certainly in those locations, yes.
Okay. And can you speak to the project's effect to the character of the neighborhood? Again, I know it's a repowering, but if you can talk about that a little bit, it'd probably be helpful.
Yeah. Again, the repowering situation, talking about the 5 fewer turbines, again, would certainly reduce any negative effect that might have on the character of the neighborhood. But we don't expect the project to have any negative effect on the neighborhood.
Okay. And I take it that would also carry over to surrounding properties. Is that correct?
That's correct. One of the things with it being again, a repower situation, not a new project. So you could argue that the surrounding properties are accustomed to the wind turbines, and so at least compared to what's there now, there wouldn't be any anticipated negative effect as a result of this repower. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we've been in contact with the surrounding property owners, additional ones that maybe weren't involved from the original project. So we are working with them and working in that manner to offset any potential negative impacts from things like sound and shadow flicker.
And I know you've mentioned our discussions with the road authorities, whether that's David Anderson, who I believe is the county highway commissioner. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Or engineer? Is he the county highway engineer?
Yeah, I'm sorry for his title, but yeah,
Okay.
county engineer or road commissioner. Yeah.
So certainly, as part of that process, I know we're looking at the repowering's effect on traffic conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak to what those might be, if any?
Yeah, certainly during construction, there will be added traffic related to the construction, to the repowering, and those are largely addressed in the RUAs, the road use agreements with the county and the townships. But then, after the construction, I think it'll be sort of go back to quote unquote normal. There's, the limited additional traffic that results from the day-to-day operations of the project is pretty minimal. So we wouldn't expect any additional impacts because of that.
Okay, so very little impact, if any, on the, as far as once the repowering is in the operational phase, is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And I know that you've mentioned a number of times that obviously we're highly sensitive and concerned about protecting the ecology and the environment in the area. But if you wouldn't mind just touching again on what, if any, effect the repowering is going to have on the environment locally.
Yeah. So again, we've done the studies. We've worked with consultants. Stantec will be here to provide some more information on that. But the project will be doing a number of things to ensure that there's minimal impact on environmental issues, and certainly help to balance the benefits that do occur. We've also worked with the local environmental organizations like the Rhine Wetlands, and and IDNR, and we're ensuring that we construct and operate the project in a way that's in accordance with recommendations and guidance, and using the best practices for the wind industry.
And building on that, if you could speak to the project's compliance with any other applicable rules, regulations, or standards that are governing with regard to wind project?
Yeah, so of course, as we discussed through the application, be compliant with all the Lee County ordinance and standards, and we will continue to be constructed and operated in compliance with all the applicable federal, state, local laws and regulations.
Schneider, I'm going to present you with one. Are you familiar with Exhibit 5?
Yes, I am.
Describe for the board members what it is.
Yep, this is the special use hearing notice that was part of a letter that was delivered to property owners within the footprint and within a half a mile of the footprint of the project. And this was also published in the local newspapers.
And Mike, was that notice prepared under your supervision?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And did you also supervise the mailing of that notice?
Yes.
Now present you with what's been marked as Exhibit 6. And I think, Mike, you mentioned that notice or something substantial.
Yes.
Can you take a look at Exhibit 6, please? You recognize that document?
I do.
Can you describe to the board members what it is?
This is a certificate from the Amboy News indicating that the notice was published in the April 21st, 2021 publication of the Amboy News.
All right, and that's the notice you were just describing in the prior exhibit?
Yes.
And Mike, I'm going to present you with what's been marked as. Can you review that, please?
Yes.
Are you familiar with Exhibit 7?
Yes.
And if you could describe to the board members.
Yeah, this is a certificate of publication for the Dixon Telegraph for publication on April 21st, 2021 of the same notice.
All right, thank you. You know, I'll flip to the bottom of page 9 and ask you some questions with regard to, we've talked about a number of things and agencies we've coordinated with as this SUP application was prepared. You talked at some length regarding interactions with the Department of Natural Resources, and I know Terry Vanderwall, as you mentioned, at Stantec will get into those. And you've also talked about contacts with the Soil and Water Conservation Districts and County and the Ryan Wetland and Sand Prairie. But if you could also let the board members know, especially as it comes to bird and bat conservation, what type of activities have been undertaken in an effort to cover those topics as the application is being prepared?
Yeah, so you mentioned the Stantec. So Stantec has done a number of studies for the project, including a site assessment, and that all goes into a document which is called a bird and bat conservation strategy. And that's actually something that comes out of it's part of federal guidelines through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that provide guidance for wind projects through their development. Now, typically, it's more for newer projects that are looking at projects from without anything there. But they still provide a sort of roadmap for how to look at various species issues. And the good thing about this project is that it's been here for more than 10 years, so we have a pretty good idea of what impacts would be there. Nonetheless, we use the information that we have, the information that we've learned generally through the last 12 years on impacts of wind energy, potential impacts of wind energy on wildlife. And we put them into a bird and bat conservation strategy. And that essentially lays out the steps that a project like this could take to further minimize the impacts on wildlife. So we put that together, and that includes a number of mitigation efforts or mitigation steps that the project can take. And that's everything from making sure that operators travel the access roads at a certain speed to avoid accidental collision with wildlife, to perhaps one of the more significant thing that this project has committed to do is to during certain times of the year at night to increase the cut-in speed, meaning when winds are on the lower end of the operational range, they will not be spinning. And it's been shown through studies over time that that's a good way to reduce any potential impacts to bats, all bats, not just the ones that are federally protected, and with minimal impact on the energy production, because it's at the lower end of where the project is developing energy. So low wind, so that the blades there's not a lot of power being generated. So and it's limited just during the nighttime during certain times of the year. So all of that is laid out in this bird and bat conservation strategy, and we think it provides even greater mitigation to the wildlife than what is currently being employed by the project.
Along those lines, Mike, you've mentioned the term incidental take authorization, or ITA, a couple times.
Right.
If you could expand on that a little bit further for the board members.
Yeah. So that is through the state agency, the IDNR, and working with them, identifying what species are present around here, and the turtles, the two turtles, the ornate box turtle and the Blandings turtle, are state endangered species, and they are known to utilize some of the habitat up there, particularly around the Rhine wetland. So developers won't take full credit. This was something that was initiated by a previous owner, but they looked at that, work with the IDNR, and came up with what's called a conservation plan to lay out again the steps that would be taken to avoid and minimize any potential impacts to those turtles. And so that conservation plan was put together. We looked at it, did some slight upgrades due to the new project plan, and the IDNR we're processing that permit right now. So as I said earlier in my testimony, we've signed what's called an implementing agreement, which is essentially the owner of the project, being Vitol in this case, through the BSW DevCo, essentially committing to implementing the conservation plan and all the components of that. In exchange for that commitment, the IDNR grants a ITA, or incidental take authorization, which essentially says, because we have the conservation plan and because we're doing things to mitigate any impacts, any incidental take is authorized.
And anytime you're talking about construction, whether it's a greenfield project or a repowering like this one, folks are always concerned about how stormwater and runoff are going to be managed. If you can talk about that briefly. Yeah,
that's a fairly I call it straightforward, but there are guidelines. There's regulation under the Clean Water Act. It gets administered by local entities, and there are certain permits that we are required to secure that would essentially stipulate certain water control methods that would be used, or runoff control methods that would be used for the project. So anything from like silt fencing and controlling any discharge into waters or erosion, those kinds of things. So that's all regulated through the Clean Water Act and required to get what's called a NPDES permit, or National Pollutant Discharge and Elimination System permit. Again, that's under the Clean Water Act and administered by the Army Corps of Engineers.
So, transitioning from those plans, and I know there's a number of studies, and you've touched on a lot of those. But let me follow up to the conversation regarding endangered species.
Yes, I am. This was as a result of the consultation with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources back in 2019. The IDNR submitted a letter to the county zoning officer indicating the results of its assessment of the project and what potential species might be present, and some recommendations on what the project should do to minimize those and avoid those potential impacts. I am. This was the project's response to the IDNR letter of March 1st, and essentially going through all of the recommendations that the IDNR had put forward and describing that the project would commit to following those recommendations.
Date of that letter?
Sorry, it's March 11th, 2019.
Remember that document?
Yes. Yes, sorry. Letter of April 16th, 2021, so a very recent letter. This came about as we came in to the project, and just the time that had elapsed since the 2019 letters, re-engaged with the IDNR, asked them to take a look at the project, and essentially to make sure there's nothing new that came up in those intervening 2 years, and just refresh this. And so the IDNR looked at that. They ran it through their system, this EcoCat system, which is essentially an online database, digital database of all the presence of species in the state. And the result of this was essentially nothing had changed, and the recommendations from their March 1st, 2019 letter remain the same.
Okay, good. And it was important for you to get all this updated, I'm sure. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. We just wanted to make sure that there was nothing new that we should be aware of that might have moved into the area.
Okay. And I know we've talked a lot about the blandings and the ornate box turtle, but I'm sure that these IDNR studies cover other species as well, correct?
Yes.
And things I think locally, such as the western hognose snake, Indiana, and the northern long-eared bats. Is that correct? Among others?
Among others, yes. Yeah, so and that's what those March 2019 letters kind of go through, is those different species and the recommendations. And I think the most significant one that was identified was the northern long-eared bat and the Indiana bat, which are protected both by the state of Illinois, but also by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So and that was one of the recommendations of the increased cut-in speeds during the period from July 15th to October. So again, that was one of the recommendations that they made, IDNR made, and that the project has committed to implement.
So we've heard from IDNR as recently as the end of last month, but this engagement and process is still ongoing. Regard to the incidental take authorization?
Yeah, well, yes, that's right. And you'd almost look at them as two separate. There's the consultation around what's called the EcoCat system, which I think the letter indicates that consultation is closed unless anything changes. And then there's the separate issue of securing the ITA through the IDNR, which is still ongoing, but very near the end.
EcoCat tells you what you should be worried about, or
Yes,
potentially, and then
potentially, yeah.
you drill down on that through ultimately the incidental take authorization.
Yeah, and the incidental take authorization looks at any of these species that are state protected that determine that there could be an impact to, and those two turtles were the only ones that that there was a potential impact, and that's why the ITA was sought for those two species and not the other ones listed in this letter.
Got it. So we've talked a lot about what we've done with regard to ecology and the environment, but you've also mentioned that shadow flicker is a concern for a developer as it's planning a repowering project. Have you commissioned any studies with regard to shadow flicker impacts or potential impacts from the project?
Yes. We contracted with Burns and McDonnell. As mentioned, they performed an update essentially to the shadow flicker study. We'll let them explain more about that. But basically, they looked at each turbine location, modeled the shadow flicker on adjacent residences. And even though there's nothing in the ordinance on the threshold for the shadow, we've adopted a voluntary measure, and this is consistent with best practices across the industry of 30 hours per year, a total aggregate number of 30 hours per year at any receptor, any residence. So we've looked at that, and they've modeled about 270 known receptors, 273 known receptors. And overall in the whole project, 41 of those are modeled to go over 30 hours, about 22 in Lee County. And the project is committed to operating the project in accordance with that voluntary guideline, the recommended guidance. And unless we get a waiver from any of those landowners, we would operate the project in a way that's essentially curtails the project, those particular turbines, appropriately, such that the total number of hours exposed is under that 30 for every receptor.
Okay, so this is a self-imposed limit we're putting on ourselves.
Yes.
And have you commissioned any studies with regard to television signal interference?
We have, again, using ComSearch. They performed an engineering analysis, determined that, and we did have them do it with all 110 turbines, just to make sure we had the worst case scenario. And ComSearch found that the potential for disturbance could potentially exist, and this is just like it had been before on the previous application. But that it's unlikely that the interference would be observed on a station that a landowner desires to be watching. And the project has been committed to working with any affected landowners to mitigate such interference. And that's something that could be handled through any complaint that might come across. But again, those television and a lot of I understand in the original construction of the project, there were some concerns about that, and the original developer or operator was able to mitigate those through providing anybody who had potential television interference with cable, and that's an easy way to mitigate that, because this interference is sort of the old rabbit ears kind of TV, which with the advent of cable in the area, we can overcome that fairly easily.
And I think ComSearch will be able to talk more about the television signal study, correct?
Yes, that's right.
All right. And we've talked a lot about sound and noise emanations from the project, and how we hope that it improves with repowering. But have you commissioned any studies with regard to sound?
Yes, and again, that was Burns and McDonnell, and they'll be able to talk a bit more about that. But my understanding is the new turbines, like I said, do produce less noise at lower wind speeds. Now, the standard under the ordinance is from the IPCB guidelines, and it controls at sort of a maximum exposure. So even though these turbines might be a little bit quieter at lower wind speeds, the standard calls for us to look at the maximum. So we looked at that and modeled that. And like I said, Burns and McDonnell will be able to explain a bit more the methods for doing that, but they're very standardized, the methods and the models that are used. So there's a very close relationship between the modeling and what actually happens. through kind of years of validation of those models. And we've, again, on that, committing to operated the project in accordance with those IPCB noise regulations. That's part of the ordinance. And there's a number of different ways that we can ensure that we're compliant with that standard.
And sir, you mentioned IPCB, or IPCB. Is that the Illinois Pollution Control Board?
Yes. Sorry.
And then finally, have you commissioned any studies with regard to potential interference with emergency services or emergency communications and radio impact?
Yes, again, ComSearch was commissioned to do that, and they were looking at that on any first responder entities, based any potential impacts to first responders, 911 operators, land mobile and radio systems. And again, they'll be able to explain better than I can, but based on the way that the emergency networks are set up, many of these systems overlap and are designed to operate reliably in all environments, including non-line of sight. So which means that any signal blockage from a wind turbine does not materially degrade those communications and receptions to emergency responders. And then also mobile phone coverage is unaffected by the presence of wind turbines as well. That's based on the location of the project and the sort of the arrangement of the cell phone communication towers. Yes.
Are you familiar with Exhibit 11?
I am. This is a letter from the United States Department of Commerce. It's the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And this is an entity that looks at some the federal agency communication devices. And we had asked them, and we had a similar letter. The project had a similar letter like this, but we, again, wanted to renew that letter. And through their process, which included a 45-day period for reviewing agencies, no issues came up, and they do not have any concerns regarding radio frequency blockage on their communication systems.
And when we talk about radio frequency, did the study also examine AM/FM radio broadcast signals?
This one with the NTIA, I don't think they specifically looked at that. If you're referring to the ComSearch,
Did ComSearch look at it? Yeah.
ComSearch did take a look at that as part of their studies on the AM/FM, and again, no appreciable impacts are anticipated.
And Mr. Spearschneider, we talked a lot about how a developer looks at a repowering project, and one of the I think key considerations you look at is setback requirements in the ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes, of course. No.
And if you could describe for the board members how you considered setbacks and some of the potential issues that arose with having to consider setbacks in a repowering context, where you're trying to reuse existing foundations and towers, for instance.
Right. Well, again, with the repowering, the turbines are where they are. So, any setback issues were likely addressed when the project was initially constructed, and that is certainly the case in Lee County. So the ordinance indicates a 350-foot setback from property lines, and I think in all but 10 or 11 instances that were in compliance, and in all those instances there is an agreement with that neighboring landowner to provide a waiver.
Okay, so in any instance where, well, let me ask you this. Is it fair to say that Lee County setback requirements have been updated between, as we sit here right now, in 2021 versus 2006 when the project was originally permitted?
I believe that's the case, yes.
Okay, so as we take a look at the layout with setbacks, I think what you mentioned was that potentially 10 or 11 of the selected turbines for repowering in Lee, those existing foundations may now have setback issues against the current ordinance?
Yes.
Okay. And I think, and we'll get into that later, but we've applied for variances with those
Yes.
turbines?
Yeah,
is
that's
that
included
correct?
in the application, yes.
Okay, and
Yes.
you mentioned waivers, and what we would do is hope to get a variance for the setback encroachment, if there is one, conditions upon securing a waiver from the applicable landowner.
Yes.
And I know one of the, along with setbacks, one of the things that we have to consider with turbine siting is Federal Aviation Administration regulations. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And how do those come into play?
So there's a process for getting what's called a determination of no hazard from the FAA. That's submitting the locations, very specific locations, coordinates and height to the FAA. They will look at and evaluate it against any, call it airspace usage, which essentially if there's airports nearby or other air use nearby, those would come up and potentially flag those locations as being a potential hazard for air navigation. This project at this point has determinations of no hazard for all site locations, and those determinations were recently extended and are valid and will be valid, through next year. So we've gone through that process with the FAA and received those clearances from them.
Switching gears again, we've talked a lot about what we think are improvements between the proposed Vestas turbines and the existing Suzlon S88 turbines. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And getting into that in more detail, we've also used the term Tier 1 manufacturer. Can you describe for the board members what a Tier 1 manufacturer is and who those manufacturers are?
Yeah, so Tier 1 manufacturers, they're call it the top high quality with solid reputation, and these include, there's, as you said, three manufacturers: Siemens Gamesa, GE, and Vestas. And compared to the Suzlon turbines, which are now almost a decade, well, they're more than a decade old. These proposed Vestas turbines will provide sort of the state-of-the-art technology advancements, which will allow the turbines to produce more power, and they do also reduce the operational and maintenance cost associated with the project. So, again, essentially it's a higher quality of turbine, more reliable, and has the backing of companies that are financially secure, such that they can stand behind. It's kind of like if you had a warranty on a car or on any piece of equipment, there's a high probability that company is going to be there and be able to stand by that warranty. If there's some sort of issue, they'll be able to fix it, and that's extremely important for these kinds of projects.
Mike, if I could turn your attention to Exhibit D, the general specifications to Exhibit 1 in the application. If you could briefly describe to the board members what's in Exhibit D.
Yeah, so this just provides the general specifications of the Vestas turbines. You can go through and get a general sense of the reliability, the testing, and some of the physical features of the project, or of the machines.
Just the general turbine specifications, is that correct?
Yeah.
If folks wanted to learn about the Vestas machine, you could turn to Exhibit
It
D.
provides a little bit of background, how many are operating. And that's a big part of the Tier 1 designation is, they've a lot of hours operating, so we know what's going on. There's also the specs, being the capacity and the cut-in speed and the cut-out speeds, all the sort of technical specifications that are relevant for the project. So you can kind of take a look at those and get a sense of what kind of turbines will be going in.
And this is all information that you as a developer would take into consideration with regarding to selecting a turbine model?
Yes, it certainly comes into play.
I know that we'll have one of the Burns and McDonnell experts talk about this a little bit more, but I think it's correct to say that one of the big differences between the proposed Vestas turbines and the existing Suzlon S88s is that we anticipate these new turbines to be quieter at low wind speeds. Is that correct?
Yes.
And I think you may have mentioned that potentially these turbines might be slightly louder than the S88s at high wind speeds. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it also correct to say that at high wind speeds, typically the sound of the wind itself that's at such a high volume is typically drowning out sound turbine noise at high wind speeds?
Yep, that's generally correct. Yes.
Okay. So as a developer, when you're thinking about noise impacts from turbines, it's that low speed range that you're most concerned about, correct?
Yeah. I mean, you could say you look at that all, but certainly the amount that receptors that neighbors can hear and are affected by it is a factor of when where the winds generally are blowing, what wind speed, the background noise, and we kind of make the decisions and design it that way. Although, as I said, the standards under the ordinance are based on the maximum output.
Okay. And background noise would be like things like wind rustling through the trees or crops rustling, etc.
Yeah.
Okay,
The wind generally makes a lot of noise when it blows. When turbines are not, but yeah.
So background noise is also higher at high wind speeds.
Yes, it is.
Then if you could, we've talked a lot about reusing the foundations, the existing foundations. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What type of considerations do you take into account when you look at potentially reusing a foundation? And what led you to believe that you could reuse these foundations?
Well, generally speaking, it's an engineering question. And so we look at the specs of that foundation that were originally built, the loads of the new equipment that would be put on those towers. And then we would go through a process with engineering firms, third-party independent engineering firms that will take a look at that and certify that those foundations in the tower will be adequate to support the new equipment.
And have we gotten any of those certifications yet, or engineering reviews completed?
I believe the studies are done. I don't recall if we have the actual certifications, but the studies are done and indicating that there's the foundations are adequate.
And is it possible some minor repairs may be necessary to certain foundations to get them back up to adequacy?
We keep that option open. Again, right now it appears like there won't be that need, but we'll keep that option open. In fact, there are this week there's an engineering firm going out and doing investigations on a number of the turbines foundations right now. They just kind of dig in and do assessment to make sure that that's what's there is what they think should be there, and that everything looks like it's okay. So that is sort of the last part of that investigation.
And I know that you had mentioned one of the goals was to reuse as much of the existing project as possible. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that would include the collection lines? To
Yes.
the extent possible?
Yep.
All right. Will any upgrades need to be made to the existing project collection lines?
Same thing. We don't believe there is, although there's a couple stretches that may potentially need an upgrade there. So I think we had that at like 4,000 feet, which is a very small percentage of the total number of component portion of the lines, and that really has to do with the fact that these are slightly higher capacity turbines. So the original system was meant to accommodate I believe they're 2.0s. The Suzlands are 2.0s. These new ones are 2.2 megawatt maximum. So a slight increase in the maximum. So what that means is when the wind is high enough that the turbines are producing at max output, if those lines underground are not rated to be able to accommodate that, then we'll have to upgrade them.
I know you touched in your presentation on what the construction timeline looks like, but if you could provide the board members what the overall plan looks like what type of steps would be undertaken as the crews mobilize right now as it's currently anticipated?
So there's a number of steps. Initially, like I said, we'll begin by the mobilizing. So as we mentioned, that's the staging yard, the laydown area, getting the crews together, equipment together, putting in those temporary offices, trailer offices, and sort of getting ready to go out. Then there will be some clearing of vegetation where necessary. There won't be a lot on this project. And then installing before you go out there and start turning dirt, you'll need to install those erosion control methods that we talked about before. So those will be put in place. And then once that's all in place, then the upgrading of the access roads will proceed. And that's, again, widening the access roads that go to the turbines, putting in the crane pads. And then also any improvements on the public roads that may be needed at that point. And those all are set up for the turbine delivery. And those new components will be delivered, and they'll be delivered directly to the site. So not stopping at the laydown area, just going directly to the turbine pad area. And then we'll also be doing, if upgrade to the collection system is needed, it'll be done at that time. We'll be preparing what are called the crane paths. So in some, we'll take that, the big giant crane that takes the tops off and puts the new ones on. You'll have to prepare the land to crawl, they call it a crawl, to walk it across. So that'll be put in place as well. And then the sort of decommissioning and erection of the new ones will happen. And we'll do that across the 109 units. And then essentially at the same time, the decommissioning will happen of the 5 that will be taken out. And then once those new turbines are standing, they'll go through the commissioning process, and then they'll be placed into service. And then after that, we'll get into the cleanup stage, restoration. So all the widening of the roads, we'll take them back to where they are now, essentially. And the crane pass will do some decompaction and make sure that all site restoration is done. And we again anticipate that the project will go from July of this year to October of next year. Is that prep work? Then the new components will come, and will be done by June or so of next year, April to June of next year.
Great. And that takes us up to decommissioning. But before we get to that, I wanted to ask a couple of specific questions with regard to our variance requests, because they have slightly different standards than the SUP portion of the application. But I think you mentioned previously that we had applied for 10 or perhaps 11 variances. Is that correct?
That's right.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe we've applied for variances for turbines 59, 61, 63, 68, 70, 73, 98, 106, 114, and 120 in Lee County. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And as we talked about before, I think we've had to apply for those variances due to the fact that we intend to reuse the existing foundations and towers, right?
Yes.
Okay. Talk a little bit about, especially you from a developer and an engineering standpoint. If I'm correct, obviously it would be a significant burden to not only our landowners, but the regional residents if we were out there having to rip up and pour new foundations. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Describe what that process looks like if you have to tear out and pour a new foundation.
Oh, obviously the excavation. So there'd be 2 components to that. One would be taking out what's existing, and by the decommissioning plan, that would go down to the 4 or 5 feet, taking out all the concrete from the foundation on that, and the moving the collection lines, and then need to move to entirely new site for a foundation. So obviously you can't just pick up the foundation and put it somewhere else. You gotta take that one out, decommission that one, and then pour a brand new foundation, which is an excavation of the big hole, and laying down the mats, and then pouring the reinforced concrete in the foundation, placing the soil back on that, compacting the soil, and then reconnecting the electrically that new site through trenching of redirect of the collection system that would have to move as well. So yeah, it'd be quite an undertaking, and then one that we would are taking a lot of steps to avoid.
This would be an undertaking involving a lot of heavy equipment coming out onto regional and landowner property. Is that correct?
Yes.
And just the movement of heavy equipment alone, I take it, causes a significant burden on the land with soil compaction, tearing it up, et cetera.
Yeah. Of course, if you go into those new areas, you'll have to address that as well.
All right, and you have to bring this equipment in by a truck. Is that correct?
Yes.
So it would also congest the roads as you were doing that.
Yes.
I assume it's a fairly loud process as you're tearing out an existing foundation and pouring a new one.
With truck noise, yeah. Yep.
And the excavators?
and the excavators and the cement trucks and everything that would have to come in. So, for example, if it's a new project, I don't know how many truckloads of concrete go into each one of those foundations, but it'd be a sort of a parade of concrete loads going in.
But it's fair to say it would be a significant hardship or burden on our landowners if we had to tear up and pour new foundations.
I would believe so. Yes.
Okay. And is it also fair to say it's somewhat of a hardship and a burden on the region just to have to support the added traffic, the heavy loads, the excavators moving in and out?
Yes, it would certainly be a lot more impact on the roads.
Okay. So with regard to our request for a variance to reuse these, it's not merely for our convenience, correctly? It's to protect and reduce the burden and the hardship on the regional residents.
Yes.
And is it also, I think, fair to say that given the fact we're in a repowering situation, this is a unique circumstance. I mean, this is not something that would apply to any general project that might come to Lee County.
For the variations?
Yes.
If I understand the question, yeah, I mean, it's a wind farm, repower wind farm has a unique set of circumstances that would need this kind of variance, yes.
And if I could, let's talk about the decommissioning process that we touched on earlier. And I'm going to present you with what I think is the last exhibit.
Yes, I am. This is the agricultural impact mitigation agreement between BSW, DevCo, and the Illinois Department of Agriculture.
Okay. And are you familiar with that document, sir?
Yes.
And do you know what the general purpose of the agricultural impact mitigation or AMA agreement is?
It is just to set out some conditions that we would agree with the Department of Agriculture that would essentially address any potential impacts to agricultural land and make sure that those are properly mitigated.
And how does this agreement relate to the project decommissioning process? Oh, okay. Let me repeat my question. How does this agreement relate to the project decommissioning process?
There are certain conditions in the agreement that are related to decommissioning and that are included in our decommissioning plan.
And was the AMA taken into account as you developed the decommissioning plan?
Yes.
Okay. Am I correct to say that the AMA is dated March 6, 2019? Is that correct?
Yes.
And that agreement is still in effect today?
Yes, it is.
And the original project, the AMA would not be applicable to the decommissioning of the original project, correct?
That's correct.
The
yes.
existing project, I should say.
Right. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so the AMA is applicable only to the decommissioning of the repowered project.
Yes. Yes.
And I take it, in addition to the AMA, are there other agreements that impact the decommissioning of the repowered project or the ultimate decommissioning of the repowered project?
Other than the decommissioning plan?
Correct. I mean, we've entered into a decommissioning plan with the county as well, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So there's both state and county requirements that are involved in the decommissioning.
Yes.
And if you could, describe what the decommissioning process is going to look like. Yeah, how will each turbine be taken down?
Yeah. So simply, as we mentioned before, they would be taken down one of two methods. One would be the crane, lowering through the crane, and then one being a tilt fell. The projects would be dismantled and removed from the project site, and as the decommissioning plan sort of lays out, how the metal and the cable would be cut out at 4 feet below each foundation, backfilling all of the holes from that excavation, and And other than the roads, access roads, as we mentioned before, that the landowners would wish to retain, those would all be removed and graded as close as possible to the original ground contours. Transformer and all the other substation equipment from the site would be removed. Concrete foundations, gravel, fencing, in all other areas, and they would be regraded as well. Again, to get as close as possible to the original ground contours. Again, essentially removal of all the equipment and related facilities from those properties.
All right. Mike, did you say the removal is going to be, we're going to remove equipment to a depth of 4 to 8 inches?
4
feet.
4 feet. Sorry.
Okay. Am I correct that are certain components going to be removed to a depth of, or we're going to go down to a depth of 5 feet to remove certain components? Or 60 inches?
Yeah. So I'm trying to find that in the decommissioning, or is that the in the?
I'll note for the record, the witness's consulting notes.
Okay. So the underground cabling, we go down to 5 feet.
And what are you reviewing right now, Mike?
Sorry, this is the AMA.
Okay. So the AMA requires removal of underground cabling to 5 feet, and that's what we plan to abide by.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the AMA also requires the foundation to be removed to a depth of 5 feet. Is that correct?
I believe that is correct. I'm just looking to confirm it.
Okay.
Yes, I believe that's true.
Please, for my court reporter, keep your voice up. It's harder.
Oh,
It's hard
sorry.
for
Yeah, sorry.
take down a whisper.
Sorry.
It's
Sorry.
easy to do. It's
Yeah.
easy to do.
All right. Yes, the foundation's to 5 feet.
Okay. And lastly, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the pad mounted transformer and underground collector must be removed to a depth of 5 feet as well. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Then Mike, you touched on that we may decommission a turbine either using the crane method as you described or the tilt fell method. If you could just describe for the board members, what factors are you taking into account, or is the project going to take into account when it decides which method it may use to decommission a turbine?
Well, that comes down to schedule and availability of equipment, and cost. The crane method is using heavy lifting cranes, and that equipment. So you got to get the big cranes to come out and take them down, and it can take longer to do that if you're taking that crane one by one to disassemble. With the tilt method, you can fell the turbines using just medium duty equipment, and it takes a lot less time to do so. We're still in the planning sections. We're talking about both options, but the flexibility will allow us to fit our schedule for completing the work.
And Mike, I know that from a developer, certainly from an owner's perspective, job site safety is important during both the construction and the decommissioning process. If you could just describe for the board members what steps will be taken to ensure the safety of not only the workforce, but also of the neighbors and Lee County residents.
Yeah, specifically for the decommissioning methods, both options will require that the construction team have the site safety and security, secure the site, ensure that all non-authorized personnel are cleared before they do the tilt fell. They'll clearly mark the boundaries that to alert people of any hazards. Additionally, they'll use meetings like a plan of day meeting, on-site job safety analysis, and use all that to ensure that all authorized workers are informed of the tasks that are being completed in that particular day and are made aware of all the hazards being performed at the site. We also use audio and visual signals when using the heavy equipment, and require that all personnel have the required training and knowledge of safety protocols before they're allowed to work at the site.
And once the turbines are taken down, what happens to them next? Is there, for instance, can the nacelles be recycled? What type of steps are taken to dispose of the decommissioned components?
Yeah, there's cells can be salvaged, cut into smaller pieces, transported off to salvage yards. They can be recycled and reused. And then anything that can't be recycled will be disposed of in the appropriate manner.
And a couple final questions, Mr. Spearschneider. Lee County requires that the minimum distance between the ground and any wind turbine blade shall be at least 15 feet. Will that be the case for these new turbines? And if you could describe what the clearance level would be.
Yeah, we'll be well above that 15 feet. Will be a clearance of about 75 feet.
Okay. And Lee County ordinance requires signs warning of potential hazards, and then all cables, ropes, and wires around the turbines need to be marked to avoid harm. Could you describe what kind of signage and markings the project will employ?
Yeah, we have this standard signage that's compliant with all federal, state, and local requirements. And the turbines are all freestanding, so they don't need any ropes or wires or guy wires to secure them. So we won't need signage for those kind of components.
And Lee County ordinance also requires that turbine construction be done in accordance with all applicable Illinois state statutes. Will that be the case?
Yes.
Okay. And the ordinance also requires that all electrical distribution lines shall be underground. Will that be the case?
Yes.
And finally, Mr. Spearschneider, the ordinance requires that all wind turbines be designed with an automatic overspeed control to render the system inoperable when winds are blowing in excess speeds that the machine is designed for, and that it shall have a manually operable method to render the to render the system inoperable in the event of a structural or mechanical failure in any part of the system. And finally, that the WEC shall be designed with an automatic control to render the system inoperable in case of loss of utility power to prevent the WECs from supplying power to a de-energized electrical system. Could you describe how we intend to meet that ordinance criteria?
Yeah, so these turbines will have redundant braking systems, which include both aerodynamic overspeed controls. So that's the turbines themselves pitch. So they'll pitch out of the wind so that they don't catch the wind and turn. And then they will have mechanical brakes as well. And the mechanical brakes are operated in a fail-safe mode. The stall regulations aren't considered sufficient braking system for overspeed protection. That's why the mechanical brakes are there.
All right. Judge, that concludes my direct questions.
Okay, very good. Mr. Fox, any questions? I'm just going to go around the horn. Ms. Duffy. Board members, Mr. Forster. Mr. Burrow.
Mike.
Hi.
Anyway, talking about the shadow flicker, the self-imposed limits, are you still negotiating with neighbors, or are those agreements in place now?
So I can say that we've talked with a few of the neighbors, and I guess I would call the negotiations. We've got to a point where we're in agreement, and we are in the process of getting, a small handful of additional waivers signed right now.
Are you dealing with more agreements than the previous construction project was?
Yes, we are. I mean, I think approximately 10 additional ones we needed to get.
Thank you.
And that's across both counties. I don't know the split between Lee and Bureau.
Thanks.
Sure.
Ms. Bothy. Mr. Pratt.
Oh, I have a couple of them. The last, you stated you're going to do 58 towers in Lee County.
Yes. Yep.
The last time you were here, it was 51. One of the reasons that they gave for decommissioning some of them was that the line would not support the increased output, the collection line.
Right.
So
Just answer the question, please.
how has that problem went away?
So because the simple answer is because the turbines, the GE turbines that they were looking at have a higher capacity, rated capacity than the Vestas that we're using. So those ones, I think the last time around they were looking at capacity of 2.7 that were derated to 2.5 megawatts. So what that means is that when the wind is blowing at maximum speed, each one of those generators is generating 2.5 megawatts of power. So that could overload some of those collection lines compared to what's currently out there right now, which is I think 2 or 2.1, I forget what the Suzlands are. The Vestas are lower than those GE. So the Vestas are at 2.2. So much closer to the individual rating of the Suzlands. So our analysis is that those collection lines are adequate to support the full power of the new turbines. And that's one of the reasons why there's 109 of them going to be repowered versus the 97 I think they were looking at is because, on each particular line, but also across the whole park, each individual turbine has a higher capacity. Not to get into too much, but the reason why that's important is because of the interconnect. So where the power gets connected into the main grid, those are based on, when we talk to the grid operator, that's based on the maximum capacity that can go into that line, not the overall energy that goes in over the course of a year. So as we're saying, we're talking about there's more energy going to come out of this repowered project. That is accommodated by the current interconnect. What the current interconnect can't accommodate is a greater maximum. And so that's why there's fewer turbines that can be repowered against the Suzlands, and that's why there's more. There will be more that are repowered for the Vestas than there were for the GE.
So the Vesta V120s are 120 meter blades, correct?
The diameter, so each blade is about half of that.
So what's the diameter of the blades that are there now?
If I remember right, I think it's 90 something, 90, 93, 94.
So then the total height will increase.
Yes.
So does that total height increase cause any problems on setbacks when you're, according to your petition, that you use 1.1 or 1 times the height? Do you run into any issues by increasing the height of the whole tower?
For the most part, I think we're in compliance with that 1.1. That's sort of the goal there, but I think there are some instances where it does exceed that.
So when we talk about the recommendations from the IDNR, there was a letter dated March 11th, 2019 from Stantec that had 7 recommendations in it. Do you intend to adhere to them 7 recommendations?
Yes, we do.
Mr. Hughes.
Yeah, just a couple of questions. Actually, in the process of answering Mr. Pratt, you clarified a couple others that I had. But let's address the March 11th Stantec. When you were, March 11th, 2019 Stantec letter, when you were talking earlier, and I think this was maybe just a misstatement, but when we were talking earlier, you talked about um, making the adjustments for the bats during the July to October period. The March 11th letter talks about an April to October letter. I assume you're going to meet that period because there was different stages during that period addressed in the letter.
Sorry. I have the-
Please just don't do that to her.
Sorry.
Like the letter should be before you as an exhibit, not in the application.
Yeah, that's what I was looking for. Did you grab the?
Off the record, if you two want to consult, that's fine.
Exhibit 9.
I got it. Sorry.
You know, back on the record, do you know the pending question?
I do, yes. Yeah, just give me, if you don't mind a second here. Yeah, sorry. To clarify that, so yes, you're correct. So there's 3 seasons, 3 periods where we would be looking at the operational adjustments. That the one from April 1st to July 15th is increasing the cut-in speeds to 5.0 when the ambient temperature is above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And those are at the turbines that are within 1,000 feet of suitable bat summer habitat. Right. Then from April 1st to July 15th, all the time we will be feathering below the manufacturer's cut-in speed, which is 3.0, 3 meters per second. And that's for all the turbines, whether they're close to the habitat or not. And feathering is that sort of pitching of the blades so that they'll stop spinning or spin at a very, very slow rate such that they're not a threat to bats. And then it's the July 15th to October 15th where the cut-in speed is raised to 5.0. Again, when temperature is above 50 degrees, and that's for all the turbines. Again, not taking into consideration the distance to suitable habitat.
So in clarification, you are planning on dealing with the full period rather than the stated July to October period.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Then in one of your early statements, when it was brought up about the crane method or the tilt fell method, I believe you stated that the intent for the 5 to be decommissioned would be the crane method at this time.
Yes. Okay.
I think that's sufficient. I think, again, going back to questions, I think you answered them in answering Mr. Pratt. So
Okay.
thank you.
Back to you, Ms. Duffy.
Yes, that's correct. No, not at this point. No, because the agreements are, and that's what those LLCs are for this kind of thing. So those agreements are with either Big Sky LLC or VSW Devco LLC, and those entities remain. No, no. To the best of my knowledge, yes.
Okay. I have a few and then I'll turn to interested parties. Mine are less substantive than they are procedural. Is the crane method, sometimes called the reverse deconstruction method, is that the same thing? If you know.
It sounds like that's the right answer, yeah.
Back to the variances. I'm confused. Mr. Pratt asked you if the 1.1 times the height created any variance issues because the WTGs are now, the blade tip height will be higher. And you said yes, correct?
Yes, there are a couple of instances. Yes.
Right. Of the, and you testified that you were requesting 10 or 11 variances, is that correct?
That's correct.
Of those 10 or 11, is the 1.1 issue included in those 10 or 11?
No. And so the ordinance is the 350 feet. So we're in compliance with that 300 feet for all but those. I think we clarified that it was 10.
No, just answer my question. I'll ask
10,
it again.
yeah,
The 10 or 11 include, the 10 or 11 variances to which you alluded, do they include the 1.1 issue?
No.
If you know, how many of the 1.1 issues are there?
I don't know exactly.
Are they listed? How can I put this? Is there a list of variances requested just for Lee County?
Yes, that's in the application.
Well, in the application, I saw variances requested for Bureau and Lee County. I'm asking if there is a list only for Lee County.
Yeah, it's yeah. So on page,
There is or there isn't?
so yes, there is.
Okay. And where is that list?
That is on page 4-6.
4-6 of your application
Yep.
binder.
Yep. Section 4.2.9.
I'm sorry, I just 4.
2.9.
Thank you. And that's just Lee County?
Yes.
And how many variances then are there being requested?
11.
So the 1.1 issues are included in the 11.
No, they are not.
Okay, where are the 1.1 issues then?
It's my understanding that those, because that's just a sort of a voluntary goal, and the variances are required under the ordinance distance, which is 350 feet. So those ones at
Okay,
1.1 are.
so you're not
we don't need
requesting
other
variance for the 1.1 issue?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, interested parties. What's going on top left? Ms. Bickett, any questions of this? Oh, I'm sorry, Rex. I'm sorry. Mr. Meyer.
Will generators 84 and 86 be 110 meter or 120 meter generators?
Those will be 120 meter.
What will the total output of the development be, the difference in the current development to the new development in megawatts?
I don't have that answer offhand.
Will the generators produce more than their nameplate?
No,
They can't be changed with a change of software or anything?
I don't know if technically they can or not, but they will not be generating more than their nameplate.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thank you. I apologize again. All right, Ms. Bickett, questions of this witness?
Yes, good evening. No, we have no questions at this time, but thank you for asking.
Sure. And how about Mr. Spencer? Give Mr. Spencer a few seconds, but. All right.
Oh, I have no questions, sorry.
Oh, thank you.
Had
All right.
trouble unmute.
I don't know what he said, but I don't think he said no questions.
Yeah.
Back around the horn, Mr.
Yeah, Judge, if I may, just a couple redirect questions. Mike, if I could direct you to page 4-6 of the application that you were previously referring to.
Yes. Yep.
Okay. Is it correct to say that all the variances being requested are setbacks from property lines? Is that correct?
Yes.
And all the variances being requested are setback variances that would be with participating landowners. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that we do expect if the variances are authorized, that we would go ahead and get a waiver from that landowner,
Yes.
acknowledging their consent to the
Yes,
variance.
yes.
Okay, thank you. Sir, if you could turn to the next page, please. If you see the point number 1 references the 1.1 times setback. If you could describe for the board members what's stated there.
It says that all turbines set back at least 1.1.
Yeah.
From primary structures, schools, churches, public buildings located in non-participating parcel. Then describes that the distance will be measured from the foundation to the closest turbine.
Okay, so the project is obligating itself to the 1.1 times height setback from all the listed structures on non-participating properties. Is that correct?
Yes, it's setting that as a call it a goal.
Okay. And the second bullet point talks about we will set back 1.1 times the WEX turbine height from any residences. Is that correct?
Yes.
And it looks like point 3 talks about a turbine setback distance of at least 1 times the WEX turbine height from public roads, third-party transmission lines, and communication towers. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So is it, with regard to the judge's question, is it likely that the setbacks that are less than 1.1 would fall within that category?
I'm sorry, say that again.
We were trying to identify what, if any, setbacks would be less than the stated 1.1 times turbine height. Is that correct?
Yes, he asked that question.
Okay, right. And points 1 and 2 talked about where will be at least a 1.1 times setback. And it looks to me like point 3 and point 4 talk about a 1 times height setback versus a 1.1.
Yes.
What I'm asking is if the categories of points 3 and 4 listed here in section 4.2.9, that those would be the instances where we would not be meeting the 1.1 times height setback, but instead it would be 1 times height setback.
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you, Judge. That's my follow-up.
All right, you may step down. Thank you. And that, I'm sure, is the end of our evening. Well, no, if you guys have the patience, do you mind looking at least a couple other dates so people can sort of plan? I have outlined June 21, June 22, 5/7, and July 8 as possible available dates. Of course, do I know what days of the week they are? No. Really? It's pretty cool. All right. Monday, June 21st, Mr. Forster.
Yes.
Earl,
Don't know.
question mark. Mr. Bothy,
Yes.
Hughes,
No.
Mr. Pratt. June 22nd, Mr. Forster.
Yes.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
I don't know why I think you're not involved, but I'm sorry, Tuesday, June 22nd, Mr. Forster. Mr. Burrow,
Yes.
both
Yes.
Hughes,
Oh.
Meyer, Mr. Pratt, Ms. Duffy, both of them. Ms. Alice, both of them. Mr. Stryker, you and yours. Mr. Fox, somebody from your office, both of them. Good. And Callie, both of them. Okay. Wednesday, July 7th, Mr. Forrester. Mr. Burrow,
Yes.
Bothy,
Yes.
no, but I'm making you say it.
I know you are.
Pratt, Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Duffy, Ms. Alice, Mr. Fox, Mr. Stryker, you and yours,
Yes.
Kelly. One more. Thursday, the 8th, Mr. Forster,
Yes.
Burrow,
Yes.
Bothy,
Yes.
Mr. Hughes, Mr. Pratt,
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes.
Ms. Duffy, Miss Alice, Charlie, or Will, or Brian, Mr. Stryker, you and yours,
Yes.
Kelly. All right, we have an issue on the, well, no, we still would have a quorum on the 21st, but it'd be nice to know, Mr. Burrow, I'm not putting the pressure on you now, but maybe by the next meeting. And we will recess then until Monday, a week from yesterday, the 17th at 7 o'clock. Voila.